I don't think anyone was really surprised by the result of this election here.
Oh my gosh, I woke up this morning and I went, oh my, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, another 6 years.
Thanks, guys.
The guy who invaded Ukraine is going to stay in power. Who could have expected that? Look, you know, these were stage managed elections. The Kremlin is in control of almost all Russian state media. Any legitimate challenger, especially one who criticized the Kremlin's policies or the invasion of Ukraine, was barred from standing. This was simply a formality, not only to proclaim Putin a victor with 87.5%, but a turnout of more than 70%. The real story for me is actually the size of the protest against the election. Thousands of people came out inside Russia, despite the threat of arrest, despite the threat of intimidation, in demonstrations that were organized for noon yesterday across the country. Outside of Russia, tens of thousands of Russian nationals queued outside the embassies at the polling stations in London, for example, in cities across Europe, in neighboring countries such as Armenia, such as Kazakhstan. And those are very, very loud rallies who made it very clear, you know, this man is not our leader. This, in fact, is not the country that we want. We want a better future.
Scott, good to have you on as always. Thank you. And you're absolutely right. Absolutely stage managed, corrupt, not legitimate. The West can jump up and down. I've said many times my view is the Ukraine war has to be won because that's the only way pressure will ultimately come on Putin. Yes, you're right about the demonstrations as well, but nothing ever seems to be enough. Can I ask a question that we were talking about in the meeting this morning? When you're that powerful, when it's a dictatorship, when you control every part of that country's being, do you also spend the entirety of your life looking over your shoulder, knowing that the people who are protecting you could turn on you at any moment? Is that the danger of dictatorship, ultimately?
I mean, Vladimir Putin is a lifelong person looking over his shoulder. I mean, after all, he rose to power as a KGB officer in the world of espionage, in the world of double dealing. He's now been the leader of Russia for almost a quarter of a century, but he's also someone who's a student of both Soviet and Russian history. Josef Stalin died in his bed from a stroke because no one went to see him for 24 hours because they were happy he was out of the way. His successors were quickly pushed out of power. One of them, Lavrent Beria, was assassinated. You had a series of leaders who always were having to maneuver to make sure not that they were secure over their domestic policy or their foreign policy, but because someone else in that ruling inner circle might come after them. Vladimir Putin's the same way. So that is why, let us be honest here, that someone like Alexei Navalny, the opposition politician who died last month, had to be put away for decades in prison, and indeed may have actually been encouraged, let's put it that way, into his death by the harsh conditions. Because even though Navalny wouldn't have had a chance of defeating Putin in this election, even the semblance of opposition, the opposition to Putin, is just too much for the man's ego and for his political position to be handled.
Very interesting. Sorry, I was going to say, he mentioned Navalny, didn't he, in his speech? Wasn't there some sort of, didn't he sort of acknowledge it without acknowledging it? Tell us about that. I didn't get the complete details, but I know he mentioned him at some point.
He said it was unfortunate, Jeremy, that Alexei Navalny had died, in the same way that it's unfortunate that many figures in Russia have been shot to death, have fallen from windows, have suffered mysterious heart attacks. And then he said, oh, by the way, you know, don't blame me, because just before Navalny's death, I was going to swap him for Russian nationals who are held in prisons outside of Russia. There have been rumors about that. Whether or not it's true, we don't know. But it was Putin who, you know, a month after Navalny was finally put out, basically killed by the prison conditions, who said, oh, gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh, by the way, I'm president for another 6 years. Good luck to the rest of you.
And Scott, what's the latest on Putin's health? Because I know particularly last year there were lots of concerns about his ability to maintain the leadership. It seems like the only way that he will be taken away from being Russia's leader is, you know, by dying, essentially. Have there been any further speculation or rumours about his health like there were last year?
No, I think Putin is still, you know, in health. And there are, he has body doubles for security reasons. rather than the fact that he is not well. There are pictures where he appears to be, for example, gripping the table, which people have interpreted as being a sign, for example, that maybe he's suffering from something like Parkinson's, but there's nothing confirmed. And this quite often happens with leaders who've been in power for a long time, like the supreme leader in Iran, that kind of for wish fulfillment, you say, oh, maybe they're on the way out. I think, in fact, if to analyze it, Putin is not in complete control, but he's not in complete control because he hasn't succeeded in conquering Ukraine, because his country is under severe economic pressure, even though it's trying to maintain a wartime economy, and because it's largely isolated in the world. And so there are a lot of Russians who quite quietly might look around and say, are we really better off? The question will be, will they ever get the space to express that? And that's where we have to remind ourselves.